The cold rain fell mercilessly that night. At a dimly lit train station, a young woman named Lena stood trembling, clutching a torn suitcase to her chest. Her eyes darted nervously toward a dark sedan across the street. Her abusive ex had found her again. Panic surged through her veins. Just as he began to approach, Lena turned desperately to the only person nearby, a tall man in a dark coat waiting silently by a vending machine. "Please," she whispered, voice cracking, "pretend to hug me." The stranger blinked, confused, but the fear in her eyes left no room for hesitation. He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her gently. To anyone watching, it looked like an embrace between lovers. But to Lena, it was a lifeline. And to the man, Ethan Cross, a billionaire hiding his own scars, it was the beginning of something that would change both their lives forever. The rain had no mercy that night. It fell in sheets, relentless, cold and heavy, soaking the city until every street shimmered beneath the orange glow of streetlights. The last train had long since departed, and the station platform was nearly empty. A few flickering bulbs cast tired shadows over rows of empty benches. On one of those benches sat Lena Carter, her trembling fingers clutching the handle of a worn, faded suitcase. The hem of her dress was drenched, her hair plastered against her pale face. Her breath came in short, uneven bursts, as if the very air was too heavy to breathe. She had been running for hours, through alleys, across wet roads, through her own memories. And the memories were the worst part. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Kyle's face, her ex, the man who once promised her love, but had instead trapped her in a cage of fear. She could still hear his voice, that calm, deceptive tone that always came before the violence. "No one will believe you. Lena, no one will want you." The words echoed in her skull like a curse. Now, sitting alone on that platform, she thought she had finally escaped. Her whole life fit inside that battered suitcase. A few clothes, a photograph of her mother, and a letter she'd never dared to send. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't go back. The rain drummed louder. She looked up at the station clock. 11:47 p.m. The next train wouldn't arrive until dawn. She shivered, pulling her thin jacket tighter around her. Every few minutes, her eyes darted toward the entrance, a reflex she couldn't control. She thought she was alone. She thought she was safe. But safety was a luxury she no longer believed in. From across the platform, a tall figure stood beside a vending machine, his face hidden beneath a dark coat and umbrella. He seemed out of place, calm, composed, almost statuesque in the chaos of the storm. The faint light reflected off his watch, a detail far too elegant for this side of the city. Ethan Cross hadn't planned to be there that night. He rarely planned anything that wasn't on his meticulously structured calendar, but tonight he needed air. Or maybe he needed silence. The charity gala had left him suffocated. Fake smiles, empty compliments, people who measured worth in numbers and wine labels. He had stepped out early, dismissing his driver, preferring to walk in the rain like any other man. He wasn't sure if it was freedom or punishment. As he waited for the rain to lighten, his gaze drifted toward the woman on the bench. She looked fragile, like a ghost, trying to remember what it felt like to be alive. Something about her struck him, the way her shoulders hunched, the quiet defiance in her eyes. He recognized that look. He had seen it once before. In the mirror years ago, a car engine roared in the distance. Lena froze, her head turned sharply toward the station entrance. A black sedan had pulled up, its headlights slicing through the rain. The door opened, and a man stepped out. Even through the downpour, Lena recognized his silhouette instantly. Kyle, her pulse spiked. Panic clawed up her throat. She scanned the platform wildly. No exits, no hiding places, no one to help. The few remaining commuters had already left. Only one man remained, the stranger with the umbrella. He was looking at her now, concern flickering in his eyes. Lena's heart hammered. She knew Kyle's patterns. He wouldn't stop until he found her. Her legs trembled as she stood, clutching her suitcase, ready to run again. But she knew it wouldn't work. He was faster, stronger. Her mind raced. and then something inside her snapped into desperate clarity. She looked at the stranger, and before she could second-guess herself, she rushed toward him. Ethan blinked as she approached, fast, breathless, terrified. She stopped inches from him, her eyes wide and glistening. "Please," she gasped. "Pretend to hug me." He froze, confusion flickering across his face. "What?" Her voice cracked. "Please, don't ask. Just please." For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then Ethan saw the shadow moving behind her, a man scanning the platform, his expression predatory. And suddenly, everything made sense. Without hesitation, Ethan opened his arms and pulled her close. Her small frame fit against him like a secret being kept. His coat wrapped around her shoulders, shielding her from the rain and from the eyes that hunted her. To anyone watching, it looked like a reunion. Two lovers caught in the storm. To Lena, it was a shield. She buried her face in his chest, trembling uncontrollably. "Shh," he whispered instinctively, his voice low, protective. "You're safe. Don't move." Kyle's footsteps echoed closer, then slowed. Ethan turned slightly, angling his body between her and the man. He kept one arm around her, steady, natural. His other hand tightened on the umbrella handle like a silent warning. Kyle stopped a few feet away. Squinting through the rain, for a tense moment, no one spoke. Then, realizing Lena was with someone, Kyle hesitated. His jaw twitched. He glanced between them, suspicion clouding his face. Ethan met his gaze, calm, unflinching, eyes sharp as glass. It was the kind of stare that said, "Don't." After a long, tense silence, Kyle cursed under his breath, turned and walked away, disappearing into the rain. Only then did Ethan relax his grip slightly. "It's okay," he said softly. "He's gone." But Lena didn't let go. Her body still shook, her breathing ragged. He waited patient until she finally stepped back, her eyes downcast, voice barely a whisper. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "I didn't know what else to do." Ethan shook his head. "No need to apologize. You did the right thing." She tried to smile, but it came out broken. "You must think I'm crazy." "I think," he said gently, "you're scared, and you had good reason to be." Her eyes flickered with surprise. Most people dismissed fear as weakness. But this man, this stranger, spoke as if he understood it. She looked away, blinking back tears. "Thank you for helping me," he nodded. "Do you have somewhere safe to go?" She hesitated. The silence said enough. He glanced at her drenched suitcase and then at the endless rain outside. "There's a cafe open 2 blocks down. Warm, quiet. Let me walk you there." She shook her head quickly. "No, I can't." He raised a hand gently. "It's not charity, just human decency." Something in his tone disarmed her. After a moment's pause, she nodded. As they walked side by side through the rain, Ethan silently held his umbrella over her, letting the storm soak him instead. When they reached the cafe, she turned to him one last time. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice fragile but sincere. "I'll be okay now." He studied her for a moment. Something about her lingered in his mind. As she disappeared inside, Ethan lingered in the rain, his heart strangely restless. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her story. But he knew one thing for certain. Something about that woman had just shifted the axis of his world, and he would see her again. The morning came softly, washing away the storm, but not the memories it left behind. For Lena Carter, dawn was a cruel reminder of how fragile peace could be. The cafe where she had sought refuge the night before had long since emptied. She sat by the window, watching streaks of light crawl across the wet pavement. Her coffee was cold, untouched. The waitress had stopped asking if she wanted anything else hours ago. She had nowhere to go, no one to call. Her phone had been smashed days earlier. The last message she'd sent never answered. Her savings, barely enough to last a week, were folded neatly inside her coat pocket. The stranger from the train station haunted her thoughts. His steady voice, his calm eyes, the way he had stepped between her and danger without hesitation. She hadn't even asked his name. And yet, For the first time in months she had slept, not peacefully, but safely, with that memory in her mind. But safety, she knew, never lasted. Across the city, the morning unfolded differently for Ethan Cross. The penthouse windows framed a skyline glinting beneath the pale gold sun. His assistant Miriam stood at the kitchen island, tablet in hand. "Mr. Cross, the Japan board meeting is at 10 a.m. sharp, followed by a luncheon with the Minister of Trade. You're expected at—" "Cancel the luncheon," Ethan said quietly, sipping black coffee. Miriam blinked. "Sir?" He rarely cancelled anything. His schedule was his armor. Every hour filled, every moment accounted for. "I'm not in the mood for diplomacy today," he said, staring absently at the city below. "Just the meeting." Miriam hesitated, sensing something different about him. "Understood." As she left, Ethan set the mug down and leaned against the counter. The memory of last night replayed in vivid fragments. The fear in the woman's eyes, the tremor in her voice, the desperate plea that cut through the rain. "Please, pretend to hug me." He had encountered all kinds of people, investors, con artists, politicians, but never someone like her. There was no pretense, no hidden agenda, just raw fear and quiet strength. It unsettled him. He had helped her on instinct, but something about her lingered, as though that single act had cracked open a door he'd spent years keeping locked. He shook off the thought and turned toward the city. He had built his empire from nothing. He had learned to survive through logic, precision, and control. Feelings, he reminded himself, were a luxury he couldn't afford. Back at the cafe, Lena folded her hands around her cold mug, watching raindrops trail down the glass. She couldn't stay much longer. The cashier kept glancing her way, tapping the counter impatiently. She forced a small smile, stood, and pulled her soaked suitcase closer. The bell above the door jingled as she stepped out. The world smelled of wet asphalt and uncertainty. The city was waking up. Cars, honking, people rushing to work, coffee carts steaming on corners. Lena blended into the noise, walking quickly, clutching her bag like a shield. She followed the signs toward the Hope Haven shelter, a place she'd once volunteered at before her life had spiraled. The irony made her chest ache. The shelter matron, Mrs. Donnelly, recognized her instantly. "Lena, my dear, it's been ages. What happened to you?" Lena smiled weakly. "Just starting over." Mrs. Donnelly's eyes softened. "Then you've come to the right place. A bed, a warm meal, and a clean set of clothes. It wasn't much, but it was more than Lena had expected that morning. As she lay in the narrow cot that night, exhaustion dragged her into sleep. But just before her eyes closed, she saw the stranger's face again. Those eyes, calm, distant, but kind. Somehow they gave her strength. She didn't know his name, but she whispered into the dark, "Thank you." Ethan sat in his office, surrounded by glass walls and chrome furniture, everything immaculate, everything expensive. Yet for the first time, it all felt meaningless. His company, Crosstech Global, had just secured a deal worth billions. The press would call him a visionary again. Investors would celebrate. But Ethan felt none of it. His assistant entered quietly. "Sir, the Japan team is ready." He nodded but didn't move. Instead, he opened a file on his tablet, a news article about the city's growing homelessness problem. He read it twice. Then, without really knowing why, he asked, "Miriam, what's the current status of our urban outreach initiative?" She blinked, caught off guard. "The one we paused last quarter?" "Yes, restarted. Triple the funding." She frowned slightly. "That's a massive expense." "Do it," he said, more softly than usual. "No publicity, no media, just do it quietly." She nodded, a little surprised, and left. Ethan leaned back in his chair. He didn't understand what was happening to him. He wasn't a man who acted on emotion. Yet something about that encounter had lodged itself deep inside him, a quiet whisper he couldn't ignore. Maybe it was her courage. Maybe it was the fear she tried to hide. Or maybe it was the way, even in desperation, she hadn't begged for help, only for dignity. Days passed. Lena began volunteering at the shelter in exchange for food. She helped serve breakfast, sorted clothes, comforted newcomers. It gave her purpose, a fragile flickering light in a world that had gone dark, but finding steady work was harder. Most places wanted a permanent address, an ID, or references she no longer had. One afternoon, she passed by a towering glass building, Crosstech Global, unaware of who owned it, unaware that her fate was already tangled with the man whose name shone in silver letters above the door. She paused to look at her reflection in the polished glass. Tired eyes, bruised soul, but still standing. Then she walked on. Inside that same building, Ethan was finishing a late meeting. As his driver pulled the car around, he caught sight of a familiar figure on the security feed. A woman walking past the entrance, suitcase in hand. For a split second, he thought it was her. He stood abruptly, heart pounding. But by the time he reached the window, the sidewalk was empty. He exhaled, half in disappointment, half in disbelief at his own reaction. Get it together, Ethan, he muttered to himself. Still that night, as the city glittered below, he found himself scanning the streets, searching for a face he wasn't supposed to remember. Lena slept in the shelter again that evening, the rain whispering against the windows. She dreamt of that night at the station, but this time, when she turned to run, the stranger was already there. Holding out his hand, she took it without hesitation, and for the first time in years, her dreams didn't end in fear. Neither of them knew it yet. But fate had already drawn its invisible line, and soon their paths would cross again, not by chance, but by destiny. The rain had given way to sunlight, but for Lena Carter, every new day still felt like survival. The city was relentless, too fast, too loud, too indifferent to people like her. Yet she refused to let despair win. She had begun to find a rhythm at the Hope Haven shelter. Mornings were for helping others, afternoons for searching job boards and posting applications, evenings for reflection. Every night, when the lights dimmed and quiet settled, she whispered a silent prayer of gratitude, not just for safety, but for the stranger who had helped her. She still didn't know his name, but his face lived in her memory like a guardian shadow. When an announcement was made at the shelter about a temporary cleaning position at a corporate office, Lena's hand shot up instinctively. The pay was modest, the hours long, but it was honest work. "You'll be assigned to Crosstech Global," said Mrs. Donnelly. "Big place. Don't let the name scare you. They're good people." Lena smiled faintly, unaware that the name Cross was about to rewrite her destiny. The next morning, she stood at the towering glass building of Crosstech Global, nerves tightening her chest. Her reflection in the revolving doors looked smaller than she felt inside. The security guard at the reception handed her a visitor's badge and pointed her to the janitorial wing. "Report to Supervisor Miles, floor 42. 42 floors of shining steel, glass, and power." Lena took a deep breath before stepping into the elevator. The mirrored walls reflected her nervous smile, a woman who was trying to piece her life together, one shift at a time. As the elevator rose, she stared at the digital display, counting upward. 21, 30, 37, 42. Each number felt like a step away from her past, a quiet climb toward redemption. The doors opened with a soft chime. Rows of offices stretched endlessly, bright and pristine. Everything smelled of coffee, paper, and quiet authority. "Miss Carter?" A voice called. She turned to see Supervisor Miles, a tall, bald man with kind eyes and an easy smile. "Welcome aboard. Your first job's pretty simple. Conference rooms and executive hallway. You'll get the hang of it quick." "Thank you, sir," she replied softly. He nodded. "And don't worry. The people here are decent. Just keep your head down, do your work, and stay clear of the CEO's floor unless called." Lena smiled nervously. Understood. She had no idea that the CEO's floor would be exactly where her fate awaited. Meanwhile, Ethan Cross stood in his top-floor office, the city skyline sprawling behind him. His assistant, Miriam, was briefing him on a new outreach initiative. "We've shortlisted several candidates for the Foundation's local division," she said. "I think you'll be pleased." Ethan nodded absent-mindedly, his gaze drifting to the rain-streaked glass. He was listening, but only partially. His thoughts kept wandering back to that night at the station. He didn't understand it. He had met thousands of people, clients, donors, admirers, yet none had stayed in his mind like that trembling woman in the rain. He didn't even know her name. He tried to push the thought aside. He was a man who thrived on focus and precision. Distraction was a weakness, yet every now and then he caught himself scanning crowds, wondering if she was somewhere out there starting over, surviving. By noon, Lena was scrubbing the glass walls of a conference room on the top level of the executive wing. The floor was unusually quiet. Her reflection moved ghost-like over the shiny surface as she worked. Then, the soft click of footsteps echoed down the hallway. She didn't turn immediately. She was too focused on her work, until a calm, deep voice spoke behind her. "You missed a spot." She froze. Her hand went still. That voice, it couldn't be. She turned slowly, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. Standing there just a few feet away was him, the stranger from the train station, the man who had held her as if shielding her from the world, the man whose eyes she had never forgotten. Her breath caught. "It's you." Ethan's expression flickered from curiosity to shock, and then softened into something unreadable. "I thought I'd imagined you," he said quietly. Lena's throat tightened. "I didn't expect to ever see you again." For a long moment, neither of them moved. The silence between them was thick, charged with recognition, disbelief, and something deeper neither could name. Ethan stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Are you all right?" "The other night, that man, he's gone," she interrupted softly. "I'm safe now, thanks to you." Relief flickered across his face. He studied her for a moment, her clean uniform, her tired eyes, the faint tremor in her hands. "You work here?" he asked gently. She nodded, embarrassed. "Just started today. Cleaning staff." He hesitated. "And you didn't know this was Crosstech?" She shook her head. "I didn't even know what Crosstech was." He chuckled softly, a sound rare even to himself. "Then maybe it's fate," Lena blinked. "Fate," he shrugged, "or coincidence. But I've learned not to ignore either." Their eyes met again, and this time she didn't look away. Later that afternoon, Ethan called his assistant. "Miriam, I want a temporary position added to the company's community outreach program. Someone with empathy, patience, and life experience. We'll call it an advisory role." Miriam raised an eyebrow. "And who exactly did you have in mind?" "Someone I just met again by chance," he replied simply. The next day, Lena was called into the HR office unexpectedly. She feared she'd done something wrong. "Miss Carter," the HR manager began, "we've been asked to move you into a new department, a temporary position in the CEO's outreach division. You'll be assisting with the community project." "Me?" she stammered. "Why me?" "Mr. Cross personally approved it," the manager said, smiling faintly. Congratulations." Lena walked out of the office in stunned silence, her heart racing. She didn't know whether to feel grateful or terrified. That afternoon, she stepped into Ethan's office again, this time not as a stranger, but as part of his world. He looked up from his desk as she entered, his expression unreadable but kind. "I'm not qualified for this," she said immediately. "I don't even know why you'd—" Ethan interrupted gently. "Because you understand things most people here don't. Pain, compassion, survival, that's exactly what this project needs." Lena stared at him, speechless. No one had ever spoken to her that way before. "You believed in me before I believed in myself," she said quietly. He smiled faintly. "Then let's call it even. You reminded me that humanity still exists, even in the rain." She felt something shift inside her, a fragile hope, something she thought she'd lost. As she left his office, Ethan watched her go, realizing he hadn't felt this alive in years. Neither of them knew it yet, but the simple act of trust between them was about to become something extraordinary, something that would test their hearts, challenge their fears, and heal their broken pasts. Weeks passed, and for the first time in a long while, Lena Carter woke each morning with a sense of purpose. Her new position within Crosstech, Global's outreach division, didn't just give her a paycheck. It gave her dignity. The office floor she now worked on was different from the one where she had once scrubbed glass walls. Here the atmosphere was calmer, more human. The division focused on charitable initiatives, shelters, education, and community rebuilding programs. Her role was simple at first: answering emails, organizing schedules, sorting reports. But soon her natural empathy began to shine. She didn't just process data. She listened to the stories behind each application for aid. She would pause, reading between the lines, noticing when someone's words were hiding pain, or when a plea for food was really a cry for safety. Her notes were thoughtful, filled with compassion, and though Ethan Cross rarely showed it, he noticed everything. One afternoon, he stood silently at her desk, watching her sift through a stack of forms. She was so focused she didn't notice him until he spoke. "You read every one of those?" he asked. Startled, she looked up. "Oh, Mr. Cross, I try to. Each one is a person's life, not just a request." He nodded slowly. "Most people in this office wouldn't think that way." Lena smiled faintly. Maybe they've never had to write one. Her words struck him harder than she realized. For a brief second, Ethan's usually calm expression softened, a flicker of sorrow passing behind his eyes. He remembered the hundreds of letters he had once received after his wife's death. Condolences from strangers, investors, even politicians. But not one of them had understood. Not one had reached the pain that lived beneath the surface of his success. Lena turned back to her work, unaware that her simple truth had stirred something deep within him. Over the following weeks, they began to spend more time together, not intentionally, but naturally. Ethan would stop by her desk to discuss projects, but their conversations often drifted to other things: books, memories, dreams. He discovered that Lena loved poetry and used to write stories before her life unraveled. She learned that Ethan once played piano, but hadn't touched a key since his wife's funeral. Through these quiet exchanges, a fragile friendship took root, one built not on wealth or pity, but on shared humanity. One rainy evening, Lena stayed late at the office, finalizing files for the Women's Shelter Expansion Project. The city light shimmered through the window, painting golden streaks across her papers. Ethan walked in, still in his tailored suit, though his tie was loosened and his expression weary. "You're still here?" he asked. She smiled softly. "I could ask you the same thing." He chuckled, stepping closer. "Fair point. But you don't have to work this late." "I know," she said, eyes still on the papers. "But some of these women, they've been waiting weeks for approval. I just want them to have a chance." Ethan studied her for a moment. "You remind me of someone." "Who?" He hesitated. "My wife." The words hung in the air, fragile and raw. Lena looked up slowly, sensing the heaviness behind them. "She must have been kind." "She was," Ethan replied quietly. "Too kind and too trusting." What happened? He walked to the window, his reflection merging with the city lights. 5 years ago. Car accident. My father's manufacturing company built the vehicle's model, a faulty brake system. She didn't survive. Lena's heart clenched. "I'm so sorry." He nodded once, as though he'd repeated those words 1,000 times, and each time they still failed to heal anything. "That's why I left my father's company," he continued. "Started Crosstech. I wanted to build something that helped people, not hurt them. But somewhere along the way, I lost what it was all for." She rose quietly from her chair and walked to stand beside him. The city below glowed like a sea of forgotten dreams. "You haven't lost it," she said softly. "You just needed to remember why you started." He turned toward her, and for the first time, he saw something he hadn't seen in years, understanding, unspoken but real. From that night, something shifted between them. Their professional boundaries remained intact, but there was warmth in their interactions now, an ease that made the office feel less like a fortress and more like a refuge. Lena began accompanying Ethan to outreach events, community dinners, and meetings with charity partners. At first, she felt out of place amid polished executives and socialites, but Ethan always made sure she was part of the conversation, never overshadowed. When she spoke, people listened, not because of her title, but because of her sincerity. One evening during a charity gala, Lena found herself standing beside Ethan as photographers flashed and guests murmured. A young girl approached her shyly, tugging at her sleeve. "Miss," the girl said, holding up a paper heart. "I made this for the people who helped my mom." Lena crouched down, accepting it with a teary smile. "It's beautiful." "Thank you." Ethan watched from a few feet away, an unfamiliar warmth filling his chest. In that moment, surrounded by wealth and noise, he realized that the truest kind of grace was the kind that asked for nothing in return. But not everyone looked kindly upon their growing connection. In the weeks that followed, whispers began circulating through the upper offices. "She's just a janitor," he promoted. "Must be nice to catch the boss's attention. She's manipulating him. It's obvious." Lena tried to ignore it, but the glances, the smirks, the snide comments began to chip away at her confidence. One afternoon, as she left a meeting, she overheard two executives laughing. "She probably thinks she's special," one said. "Wait till he gets bored." The words hit like daggers. She ducked into the restroom, hands trembling. For a long moment, she stared at her reflection. The same tired eyes, the same scars hidden beneath makeup. "Maybe they're right," she thought bitterly. "What am I doing here? I don't belong in his world." That evening, when Ethan called her to discuss a project, she sounded distant. "Lena," he asked gently, "something wrong?" "No," she lied, "just tired." But Ethan wasn't fooled. He had built an empire by reading people, and he could see she was retreating. The next morning, he walked into the outreach division with a quiet resolve. As his staff looked on, he called for everyone's attention. "I want to make something clear," he said firmly. "Miss Carter's work has been instrumental in the success of our foundation. Her empathy, insight, and dedication have transformed how we operate. She's not just part of this team, she is the heart of it." The room fell silent. Lena stood frozen, eyes wide, her heart pounding. After the meeting, she approached him quietly. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. He smiled. "Yes, I did," she swallowed hard. "You just made me believe something I hadn't in a long time." "What's that?" "That I deserve to be here." Ethan's gaze softened. "You do, Lena. More than you know." That evening, as she left the building, she paused at the glass doors. The city lights reflected around her like 1,000 tiny stars. Somewhere deep inside, she realized she was no longer the frightened woman who had begged a stranger for safety in the rain. She was healing. Slowly, quietly, but undeniably, and though she didn't know it yet, the next storm was already brewing. One that would test everything she had rebuilt. The morning began like any other. Coffee cups clinked in the break room, printers hummed in the background, and the air inside Crosstech Global carried that familiar mix of ambition and caffeine. Lena was early, as usual, reviewing reports before the office filled with chatter. But today, something felt wrong. People were whispering, not the usual office gossip, but sharp, hushed tones that made the hair on her neck stand up. When she walked past, conversation stopped. Eyes followed her. Some curious, some mocking, others quietly pitying. Her heart began to race. By the time she reached her desk, she saw it. An open laptop screen glared with headlines splashed across major news sites. Billionaire CEO Ethan Cross linked to mystery woman from the streets. Shocking past revealed. Janitor turned executive assistant. Who is the woman behind Crosstech's sudden charity shift? Exclusive photos. Ethan Cross's secret protege, once homeless and arrested during a protest. Her knees weakened. The blood drained from her face. Clicking one link, her heart sank further. Someone had dug into her past. Her years living in shelters, the night she'd been wrongfully detained during a rally for low-income housing. Her face, her son's old photo, even her former workplace, all laid bare for the world to see. The comments beneath were cruel, classic gold digger move. She played him like a violin. Billionaire charity makeover, courtesy of a sob story. Lena's fingers trembled on the mouse. Her throat closed up as a suffocating silence wrapped around her. When Ethan arrived at the office an hour later, the tension was palpable. His assistant tried to stop him at the door, but he brushed past her, eyes narrowing as he saw the chaos unfolding on screens and phones. He walked straight to Lena's desk. She looked up, tears in her eyes. "You saw it?" "Yes," he said, voice low but steady. "I saw it. Ethan, I swear, I didn't talk to anyone. I didn't." He raised a hand gently. "I know you didn't. This isn't your doing. But the photos, the stories, they make it sound like you used me?" He finished. "Let them talk. They always do." But Lena shook her head, her breath trembling. "You don't understand. I've worked so hard to bury that past. My son, he's finally in school. He doesn't need this kind of attention." He looked at her, his jaw tightening. "Then we fight this together." By midday, the situation had exploded. The company's PR department was in full crisis mode. Reporters camped outside the building, and social media was ablaze with speculation. On the top floor, Ethan convened an emergency meeting with his board of directors. One of the older executives, a gray-haired man with sharp eyes, slammed a report onto the table. "This is unacceptable, Ethan. The company's image is at stake. That woman is a liability." Ethan's gaze darkened. "That woman has done more for this company's soul than any of you sitting here." "Be reasonable," another director interjected. "Charity is one thing, but this, a scandal involving your personal life." "There is no scandal," Ethan interrupted coldly. "There's a lie spun by people who profit from destroying others." The room fell silent under his tone, but even as he defended her, Ethan knew how ruthless the world could be. Investors didn't care about truth. They cared about image, and for the first time, he feared that his feelings for Lena might destroy the very foundation he had built. That evening, security escorted Lena out through a side exit to avoid reporters. The flash of cameras still found her. Shouts filled the air. "Miss Carter! Did you seduce Mr. Cross? Are you living with him? Do you plan to resign?" Her eyes burned as she pushed through the crowd, clutching her bag tightly. A single voice shouted from behind, "You're just another charity case, sweetheart." She stumbled, nearly falling, until a strong hand caught her arm. "Ethan!" He pulled her close, shielding her from the cameras with his coat. "Keep walking," he whispered. "Don't say a word." Inside the car, she finally broke. Tears spilled down her cheeks, raw and uncontrollable. "I told you this would happen," she whispered through sobs. "People like me, we don't belong in your world." He turned to her, eyes fierce. "Don't you ever say that again. It's true. Look at me. Everything I touch turns into chaos. Lena." His voice softened, but there was steel beneath it. "You didn't bring chaos. You brought light, and they hate what they can't control." She shook her head. "You don't know what they'll do. They'll dig up more. My past, my mistakes. Then we'll face it," he said firmly. "Together." But deep down, Lena wasn't sure she had the strength to fight. That night, she couldn't sleep. Her small apartment, once her refuge, now felt suffocating. She scrolled through the endless posts and articles, her name trending alongside Ethan's. Every photo, every word, seemed designed to humiliate her. At 2 a.m., she packed a small bag. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't let Ethan's career collapse because of her. Before leaving, she wrote a letter. "Ethan, you gave me hope when I had none. You believed in me when the world didn't, but now I can't be the reason your life burns down. Please don't look for me. I need to protect what's left of my son's future and yours. Thank you for teaching me that kindness still exists." Lena, she left the letter on her desk and slipped quietly into the night. The next morning, Ethan arrived at the office early, determined to confront the media storm head-on. But when he reached Lena's desk and saw the folded note, his heart sank. He opened it, reading every word in silence. Then he stood still for a long time. The noise of the city muffled behind the glass. His mind raced through memories. The first time he saw her trembling in the rain, her laughter over coffee, her eyes when she spoke of hope. She was gone, without another word. He grabbed his coat and walked out. His assistant called after him, but he didn't stop. There was only one thought in his mind. He couldn't lose her. Not like this. Hours later, a news alert hit the web. Ethan Cross cancels press conference. Sources claim CEO missing, but Ethan wasn't missing. He was on the road, searching every shelter, every church, every forgotten corner of the city where she might have gone. And as the rain began to fall, just like the night they met, he whispered to himself, "You're not disappearing this time, Lena, not while I can still find you." The rain poured like the heavens were mourning. It drummed on the roof of Ethan's black car as he drove through the dimly lit streets of the city, streets far removed from the polished skyline where he belonged. He had spent 2 days searching, 2 sleepless, relentless days. His tailored suits had been replaced by a gray hoodie and worn jeans. His eyes were hollow from exhaustion. Every shelter, every church, every place that had once given Lena refuge, he went there, asking the same desperate question. "Have you seen her?" Lena Carter. Brown hair, gentle eyes, early 30s. Some recognized the name, others didn't, but all saw the urgency in his eyes. The eyes of a man who had everything, yet stood on the edge of losing what mattered most. At St. Bridget's shelter, an elderly nun took pity on him. "She was here once," she said softly. "A long time ago, kind girl. Helped serve food even when she had none. Do you know where she might have gone?" Ethan asked, voice cracking. The nun shook her head. "People like her. When they run, they disappear into quiet corners of the city. Look where hope still flickers, Mr. Cross. That's where you'll find her." That night, Ethan stopped at a small diner, the kind that never closed. He sat by the window, staring into the rain-streaked glass. His phone buzzed with calls from his assistant, his PR team, even the board. He ignored them all. Crosstech could survive without him. But she couldn't. Not again. As he stared into his untouched coffee, memories flooded him. The night she had begged him for a simple hug. The tremor in her voice when she said she was tired of being invisible. The way her smile had returned, fragile but real. As she rebuilt her life piece by piece, now she was gone. Not because she was weak, but because she was protecting him. He clenched his fists, guilt burning deep in his chest. "You should have protected her first," he muttered to himself. On the 3rd day, he finally got a lead. A contact from a local outreach program texted him. "Someone matching your description volunteered at our center this morning on 12th Avenue. Ethan's heart jolted. Within minutes, he was in the car, tires splashing through puddles as he sped toward the address. When he arrived, the rain had eased into a soft drizzle. The old community center stood between crumbling buildings, its sign barely legible. He pushed open the door and stepped inside. The scent of soup and detergent filled the air. Volunteers moved between tables, serving the homeless and the hungry, and there, near the back, wearing a faded blue sweater, was her, Lena. Her hair was tied back loosely. Her sleeves rolled up as she poured soup into a bowl. She looked tired but peaceful, smiling faintly at an elderly woman who thanked her. For a long moment, Ethan couldn't move. He just stood there, watching her. The woman who had changed his life, unaware that she was doing it again, simply by existing. Finally, he took a step forward. The floor creaked and she turned. Their eyes met. The ladle slipped from her hand, clattering into the pot. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice trembling. He walked toward her slowly, afraid that if he moved too fast, she might vanish like a dream. "You left," he said quietly. "No goodbye, no call. Just a note." Tears filled her eyes. "You weren't supposed to find me." "I had to," he said. "You think I could just go back to that office, sit behind that desk and pretend you never existed? You don't understand? Then make me understand." He interrupted, emotion breaking through his calm. "You think you ruined my life? Lena, you saved it." Her breath hitched. "Saved it?" "Yes," he said, stepping closer. "Before you, I was alive, but I wasn't living. I had walls, steel walls, around my heart. You tore them down. You made me feel human again." She looked away, shaking her head. "And now the world thinks I used you. They're tearing you down because of me. I couldn't stay and watch that happen." Ethan's voice softened. "Do you really think I care what they say? Let them write their lies. I only care about what's true, her voice cracked. And what's true, Ethan? He took her hand gently, his thumb brushing over the calluses on her palm. That I need you in my life, not as an employee, not as a project, as someone who reminds me that kindness still exists, that love still means something. The room had gone silent. A few volunteers watched quietly, realizing the depth of the moment unfolding before them. Lena's tears fell freely now. You shouldn't say things like that. Why not? Because I'll believe you, she whispered. Ethan smiled faintly. Then believe me. She laughed through her tears, half in disbelief, half in surrender. You're impossible. Only when it comes to losing you, he said softly, for a long moment. They stood in silence, the sounds of the rain outside blending with the quiet hum of the shelter. Finally, Lena looked up at him, the same man who had once seemed unreachable, untouchable, and said, I don't know what happens next. Ethan, the world doesn't make it easy for people like us. He nodded. Then we'll build our own world. Later that evening, as the rain subsided, they walked outside together. The city glistened, its streets shimmering with reflections of neon and hope. Lena stopped under a flickering streetlight. I was scared, she admitted softly. Every time something good happened in my life, it disappeared. I thought if I left first, it wouldn't hurt as much. Ethan looked at her with quiet tenderness. And did it hurt less? She smiled sadly. No, it hurt more. He stepped closer, his hand brushing away a tear from her cheek. Then don't run anymore, she exhaled shakily, nodding. I won't. And in that fragile silence, with the city around them breathing softly, Ethan pulled her gently into his arms, the same way he had once pretended to, months ago in the rain. But this time, it wasn't pretend. This time, it was real, as they stood beneath the streetlight, holding each other while the storm faded. Ethan whispered, I don't care what the world says. Lena, let them write their headlines. We'll write our own story. She smiled against his shoulder. Then let's make it a good one. And for the first time since that fateful night they met, both of them finally felt at peace, not because life had stopped hurting, but because they had found someone to share the pain with. The morning after Ethan found Lena, the city was already waking to new storms, this time not of rain, but of rumor. Grostek's name still filled the news cycle, and headlines screamed with speculation. Investors panicked, board members whispered, and PR teams scrambled for damage control. But none of that mattered to Ethan anymore. He had found what he was looking for. Now, it was time to fight back, not with silence, but with truth. Back in his penthouse office, sunlight cut through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating dust motes like floating sparks of defiance. Lena stood beside him, still uncertain, as Ethan faced his senior staff and media advisors. We're going public, he announced. The room erupted in chaos. Sir, that's a terrible idea. The story will only escalate. Let the media forget it. Don't pour fuel on the fire. Ethan held up his hand. His voice, calm but resolute, silenced them. I won't let lies define her, or me. We tell the truth. Our way, not theirs. He turned toward Lena. You don't have to do this, he said softly, but she met his gaze with quiet strength. I started this without meaning to, Ethan. I should help end it. The right way. He nodded once. Then we do this together. 3 days later, the press conference was announced. The world buzzed with curiosity. Every major outlet cleared space for it. Was the billionaire about to confess? Was there a scandal bigger than anyone imagined? The tension reached a fever pitch. When the day arrived, the Grostek atrium was filled with reporters, cameras, and microphones. A sea of flashing lights and murmured questions. Ethan stood at the podium in a black suit, his usual calm replaced with something raw, more human. Beside him stood Lena, dressed simply but elegantly in a pale cream blouse. As the cameras clicked, Ethan began, Good morning. I know there's been much said about me and about Miss Carter here. Some of it is true. Most of it isn't. A ripple of whispers spread across the crowd. He continued, voice steady. Months ago, I met Lena on a night that changed my life. Not because of who she was, but because of what she reminded me. That compassion doesn't belong to one class, one income, or one title. It belongs to humanity." He paused, his eyes sweeping the room. "You've all seen the headlines. You've read about her past, her struggles, the things she's survived. What they didn't write about is her courage, her refusal to give up when the world turned its back. Crosstech didn't make Lena stronger. She made us stronger." Lena's eyes shimmered with emotion, but she stood tall. Then Ethan did something no one expected. He turned to her. "Lena," he said, his voice soft but audible through the microphone. "You don't owe anyone an explanation, but if there's something you want to say, now's the time." She hesitated for a moment, staring at the sea of cameras and faces. Her hands trembled slightly as she stepped forward. "I'm not used to this," she began. Her voice quivered but didn't break. "I never thought my life would be something people would talk about or judge." The room quieted. "I made mistakes. I lived through things I'm not proud of, but I never lied about who I was. I've worked hard to rebuild myself, not for attention, not for sympathy, but because everyone deserves a second chance." She glanced at Ethan, her expression softening. "Mr. Cross gave me that chance, but he didn't save me, he saw me. And sometimes, being seen is the beginning of healing." The silence in the room was profound. Even the most hardened journalists lowered their cameras, as if intruding on something sacred. Lena took a breath. "If kindness can be turned into scandal, then maybe it's not the people who need to change. Maybe it's the stories we tell about them." Ethan's hand brushed hers briefly, unseen by the cameras, but the gesture was enough to steady her. Moments later, as they stepped off the stage, reporters shouted questions. "Are you two together? Is this a publicity stunt? Will Miss Carter remain at Crosstech?" Ethan stopped, turned, and said clearly, "Yes, she will, because she earned her place here." Then, with a faint smile that carried more defiance than arrogance, he added, "And whether the world likes it or not, I stand by her." The footage spread like wildfire, but this time something changed. The tone shifted. The internet, once cruel, began to turn in their favor. Clips of Lena's trembling but brave words went viral. Hashtags like "Look second chances," "Look kindness matters," and "Stand by her" trended for days. Even talk shows and editorial pieces that had once ridiculed her began reframing the narrative. A billionaire and a woman from the streets, proving compassion can bridge any divide. A story not of scandal, but redemption. Crosstech's image, once battered, began to soar. Investors who had threatened to pull out now applauded the company's stance on social responsibility. Ethan refused to gloat, but inside he knew something had shifted, not just in public perception, but in the soul of his company. Weeks later, at a small cafe downtown, Lena sat across from Ethan, sipping coffee as laughter filled the space around them. "I still can't believe you stood up there and said all that," she said, smiling shyly. He grinned. "What, that you made the company stronger?" "That and the rest." "You didn't have to." "I did," he said quietly. "Because you've spent too much of your life apologizing for existing. It was time someone reminded the world that you're allowed to take up space." Her gaze softened. "You really believe that?" He nodded. "I do. And maybe one day you'll believe it too." Outside, the sky was bright, and the city seemed less cruel than before. As they walked down the street, they passed a group of volunteers handing out flyers for a new Crosstech initiative, a foundation supporting single parents and victims of homelessness. The name written across the banner made Lena stop in her tracks. The Carter Cross Foundation for Second Chances. Her eyes widened. "You didn't," Ethan smiled. "I did. You inspired it. It's your story that gives it purpose." Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, "Ethan, thank you." He looked at her gently. "No, Lena, thank you for reminding me what matters." As they continued walking, the crowd parted around them. The same world that once judged them now watched them with admiration. The billionaire and the woman who had once begged a stranger to pretend to hug her, now walking side by side. Not as savior and saved, but as equals. For the first time in years, both knew the truth. Love was never about rescue. It was about recognition. And when two broken souls recognized each other, healing wasn't just possible. It was inevitable. A full year passed. The world had changed, not just for Ethan Cross and Lena Carter, but for countless others who found hope in their story. What began as a scandal had evolved into a movement, a ripple of compassion that reached further than either of them had imagined. The Carter Cross Foundation for Second Chances now operated in multiple cities, offering housing, education, and job training for single parents and people rebuilding their lives. Every month, letters poured in, stories from men and women who had found courage to start over. Some wrote about leaving abusive homes, others about finding work again after losing everything. Each story reminded Lena why she had once dared to dream and why she could never stop. That morning, she sat at her desk in the Foundation's glass-walled office, sunlight spilling across the papers. She wasn't the frightened woman who had once trembled under fluorescent lights with a mop in her hands. She was Executive Director Lena Carter now, confident, composed, but still carrying the same heart that had guided her from the beginning. A soft knock on her door broke her thoughts. Ethan peeked in, his usual suit jacket draped casually over one arm. "You're still working?" Lena smiled. "You sound surprised." He chuckled and stepped inside. "I should know better by now. You don't stop until you've fixed the whole world." "Someone has to," she teased. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her fondly. "You've done more than anyone ever thought possible. The Foundation's already helped over 5,000 families this year. You realize that, right?" Lena looked down at the letters spread across her desk. "It still doesn't feel like enough." "It never will," Ethan said gently. "But maybe that's what makes you remarkable." Their eyes met, and in that look was everything unspoken. Gratitude, admiration, love, and the silent acknowledgement of how far they'd both come. That evening, they attended the first anniversary gala of the Foundation. The event was held in a grand hall, decorated with silver lights and photographs of the people they had helped. Guests arrived in elegant attire, but the mood wasn't about wealth or prestige. It was about second chances. Lena took the stage, her voice steady as she addressed the crowd. "1 year ago, I stood in this same city, terrified of who I was. I believed my past defined me, but I learned that every scar is a story of survival, and survival is nothing to be ashamed of. Tonight, we celebrate not just success, but resilience." The audience rose in applause, moved by her sincerity. Cameras flashed, yet Lena didn't shy away. She stood proudly, no longer hiding from the light. When she stepped down, Ethan was waiting for her near the stage. "You were perfect," he said softly. She smiled. "I was honest. That's all I can be." He offered his hand. "Come with me. There's somewhere I want to go." They slipped away from the gala quietly, taking one of Ethan's cars through the softly glowing city streets. "Where are we going?" Lena asked, curious. He only smiled. "You'll see." The car turned away from the glittering skyline, down familiar roads lined with aging buildings. As they slowed, Lena's breath caught in her throat. St. Bridget's Shelter, the same place where she had once served food to the hungry. The same place Ethan had searched for her in desperation. The same place where, years before, she had slept through cold nights dreaming of a life that felt impossible. Now, the building looked different. The roof was repaired, the windows replaced. Above the entrance, a new sign gleamed, St. Bridget's Hope Center, in partnership with the Carter Cross Foundation. Lena's eyes filled with tears. "You renovated it," Ethan nodded. "You told me once that this place gave you your first chance. I thought it deserved a second one too." She pressed a hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. "Ethan, it's beautiful. It's yours," he said simply. "This center will serve women and children who need shelter, education, and safety. It's the heart of the foundation, the beginning, and the reminder of what we stand for." Lena turned toward him, emotion thick in her voice. "I don't even know what to say." "Say you'll keep believing," he whispered. "In yourself, in us, in what we're building." She smiled through her tears. "I never stopped." Inside the shelter, the halls were alive again. Laughter, footsteps, voices filled with hope. Children ran past them, clutching toys and books. Volunteers moved about, serving meals and setting up beds. The air smelled of bread and warmth. One small boy stopped in front of them, tugging on Lena's sleeve. "Miss Lena, thank you for my blanket." She crouched down, smiling. "You're very welcome, sweetheart." When the boy ran off, Ethan watched her quietly, his heart swelling. "You were made for this," he said. Lena shook her head gently. "No, I was remade for this." They walked to the very back of the shelter, the same narrow hallway where, long ago, Lena had once sat crying, holding a photograph of her son and wondering if anyone would ever see her worth again. She stopped there now, her gaze tracing the cracks in the old brick wall. "This is where I hit rock bottom," she said softly. "And now, look," Ethan stepped beside her. "Now you stand at the top, not above anyone but beside them." She turned to him, smiling. "You always know what to say." He took her hand gently. "Only because I finally learned how to listen." Later that night, as they stood outside the shelter beneath the quiet stars, Lena leaned her head against his shoulder. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked. Ethan smiled faintly. "Every day. The night I asked you to pretend to hug me." He chuckled softly. "It wasn't pretend, Lena, not really. It just took us a while to realize what it meant." She looked up at him, eyes glimmering. "And what does it mean now?" He met her gaze, his voice tender. "It means you were never asking for a hug. You were asking to be seen, and I'll never stop seeing you." Her breath caught. "Even when the world forgets? Especially then." Especially then. The streetlight flickered above them, just as it had the night they met. But this time, the light stayed steady, bathing them both in a soft, golden glow. Ethan pulled her close once more, his arms warm and certain, and for the first time in years, Lena didn't flinch, didn't fear, didn't doubt. She simply closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you for finding me," he smiled. "You weren't lost. You were just waiting to be found." As dawn broke over the city, the first rays of sunlight fell upon the shelter's sign, the name gleaming with promise, St. Bridget's Hope Center inside. New lives were beginning, just as Lena's had once begun again, and standing there, hand in hand with the man who had changed everything. She finally understood. The most powerful stories are not about wealth or fame or power. They are about the quiet, stubborn endurance of love that refuses to give up. Love that begins with one small act of kindness, a hug in the rain,